Hi, I'm Congressman Joe Barton of the 6th District of Texas, and I'm here to host Afterwards with Bryan Burrough, an author who has just written a book, The Big Rich. Bryan, we're so glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Congressman. It's not every day you get interviewed by one of Texas's finest.
Well, I don't know that I'm one of Texas's finest, but I am one of Texas's. First of all, let's just get a little background. You and I are both from Central Texas. I was born in Waco, Texas. I think you were born in Waco, Texas.
I actually, it's unfortunately a bit of a family secret that I didn't move there till I was 7. I was actually born in Tennessee. But I grew up in Temple, and Texas remains steadfast in my heart.
And you have become an author. You've, unfortunately, from my point of view, moved to New Jersey, I think. And but you have written another bestseller called Barbarians at the Gate.
Right.
And now you have this book, The Rise and Fall of the Greatest Texas Oil Fortunes, The Big Rich. What made you decide to write this book?
Well, a few years back, I kind of made a promise to myself that I was going to start writing books really that I cared about, as opposed to necessarily what people wanted me to read. And so last time out, I wrote a book called Public Enemies, which was about the birth of the FBI during the Depression. And this time, it was the stories that I grew up with as a kid, the stories that kind of created the myth of modern Texas, the big swaggering families and all the money and the wealth. And I thought, these are stories that Texans of a certain age may be familiar with, but the rest of the country, if they knew them at all, is fast forgetting them. And I wanted to put it all down on paper.
Okay. Well, it's really not a myth, you said the myth. Texas is the best state in the union. I mean, let's just set, this is not an investigative
That's
interview.
Right. That's right.
But as a 6th generation Texan, I feel bound to let you know that we are the best state.
Well, when I say myth and mythos, I mean the caricature and the caricature of Texans and the Texas Big Rich. Right. And there's a difference, clearly, between what outsiders and even Europeans may think of the big rich, the wealthiest Texans, and what they really are. I mean, I think there's a lot of fact to it, but it's interesting to compare the two.
Yeah. Now, the 4 families that you profile in your book are the Sid Richardson, Perry Bass family from Fort Worth, and then the Hunt family from Dallas, and then the Murchisons also from Dallas,
right,
and then the Cullen family from Houston.
That's right.
Now, I need to let you know, I know most of those people.
I would expect I would expect that you would.
I would consider some of them close personal friends. Almost all of them are political supporters. I've been in Congress 24 years, and so I've rubbed elbows with these folks. As I said, my family's been in Texas since 1840, and I think we're the only 6th generation family that consciously went out of their way not to buy property where there were minerals.
It was a conscious effort.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back and shake some of my ancestors and say, why didn't you do what some of these families did?
Well, I'll have you know, our family was very successful in avoiding oil wealth as well.
And I guess one of the things that we need to stipulate, we're going to talk about the big rich, but obviously in a state of almost 24 million people, most Texans are just salt of the earth, middle class, work hard, pay their taxes, go to church families. So we do have some super wealthy, but the idea that everybody in Texas is a millionaire is a caricature.
It sure
we
is.
all want to be.
Well, it sure is. Not only that, I think outsiders think that oil is all pervasive in Texas, and it's not. In certain regions it is, but where you and I grew up, it really is not.
No. Now, why these 4 families? Because I could pick another 2 or 3. For example, the Moncrief family in Fort Worth has been very active.
You sure could.
I think so why these 4?
If you'd gone with the Big 10, I might have gone with the Moncriefs. I immediately, as soon as I had an editor say, how about something about the Texas wealthy, these were the 4 families that came to mind. Okay. As I started going into the research, I found that when Texas oilmen as a group kind of leaped onto the national stage in the late 40s and early 50s, in fact, they were called as a class the Big Rich, and the big newspapers, including the Washington Post, called these 4 men the Big 4. Right. They were the wealthiest at the time that Texas oil kind of went on the stage. Certainly, I think there have been Texans that have been wealthier since.
Yeah.
But in terms of the men and to some extent the families that kind of that created the image of modern Texas, it was these four.
Yeah. Now we're going to, you really start your book at Spindletop, but I'm going to start at Corsicana, Texas.
That's right.
Because Corsicana's in my congressional.
That's right. And it was before Spindletop.
That's right. And so we need to set the Texas oil industry started in Corsicana, Texas in 1894 when the city fathers were trying to drill some water wells, and they kept finding this junk in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And it finally dawned on somebody that it might have commercial value. It might be what they were drilling up in Pennsylvania, this substance called oil. So they scraped, I can't remember how many dollars, but I want to say they scraped together a couple $100 and invited some of the oil people from Pennsylvania to come down and take a look at it.
Right.
And they came down and they said it might be worth drilling. So the first real oil boom, in fact, where the Hughes family got their start, was drilling oil wells in Corsicana.
Nobody remembers Corsicana because, of course, it never became the huge boom that Spindletop did just 7 years later. But Spindletop, of course, the greatest American gusher, the gusher that started Texas oil, was drilled by some nice young men who started in Corsicana.
So now we go to Spindletop, and let's start the story. Somebody sees this rise out of town, and you take it from there because your part of the book describing Spindletop to me is just fascinating.
Well, there was this young fella down in southeast Texas in the town of Beaumont who was interested in oil, which was not a big American industry, as you point out. It was really, oil was just used for kerosene. It wasn't used for fuel oil yet at all. Long story short, he was aware of these bubbling sulfur springs around a big mound outside Beaumont. He thought it might be oil, and he kept for years through the 1890s. He tried to get people from the east to come drill it. Nobody would. Finally, one did, found nothing. Another did, found nothing. And the third one, though, in 1901, hit a gusher that was, its initial production was larger than the production of every oil well in America at the time. Its first 3 wells at Spindletop were larger than the entire world production of oil at the time. And it not only changed Texas oil, it changed the nature of how oil was used worldwide. All the big navies, the German and British Navy, changed over to fuel oil. The railroads then did the same thing, and it started the modern age.
And how many non-professional corporate types got involved in Spindletop at its height?
Well, every Texas businessman at that time, and there weren't that many of them, but you know, if you had money, whether it was from
Except
lumber,
for my family, who was sitting over there in Whitney, Texas.
whether it was from lumber or dry goods or everywhere, you threw money at Spindletop. You tried to find some way to make some money out of oil, but by and large, the Texans were outmaneuvered by Eastern interests that knew more about the business. Right. And so within 5-6 years, most of Spindletop's production was controlled by a whole bunch of American companies that were born right there at Spindletop. Gulf, Sun,
there you go.
The Texas company, then known as Texaco, were probably some of the most prominent.
Yeah, okay. So Spindletop got us going, and it really started the United States and I guess you could say the world in the modern industrial era. Would you agree with that?
Oh, it certainly did, because it popularized something we now take for granted: fuel oil. Oil wasn't used for fuel in the 19th century, and barely 10 years later, suddenly the automobile takes off, goes from something like 4,000 automobiles in 1902 to 4 million in World War I. So that, creates just a massive market for fuel oil.
Now, which of these families that you profile got involved in Spindletop? I don't think any of them
No,
did.
really none of them. In fact, I make the case, and it's arguable, but I think I've got a good case, that other than the Howard Hughes family,
Right.
The first 20 years of the Texas oil era after Spindletop really created no Texas oil fortunes in the classic sense. Most of the big hits, the big finds, were controlled by corporations, largely oil corporations. That's why what I call the era of the big rich, meaning when individual wildcatters began finding large pools of oil, really starts around 1920. And so the lifespan in my book is about 1920 to the mid-80s.
Okay, so we've started the modern oil industry with Spindletop. Now let's put your principal families on the stage.